don't be surprised if in a culture like that, this kind of objection is leveled and has power. And here's the objection. It's narrow-minded to think that Jesus is the only way to God. Now you can see why that kind of objection might be powerful in a culture that is more and more pluralistic. Everyone's got some idea about God, and some of these ideas related to God have some commonalities. So why would you think that your way is somehow exclusively better than my way if I'm not a Christian? And I think that's a very powerful objection, and it's one that we have to be able to respond to. So what we're going to do today is give you a number of ways, 3 to be precise, in which you might respond to this objection. Now they're all on our app. The reason why we put all 3 there is because we want you to have options. Because the reality of it is that different types of responses are more appropriate for different types of people you're talking to. Also, some of these responses may not feel like they resonate with you personally. They may not feel like this is the kind of response I would actually give. So we wanted to give you a number of responses, and this is why it's so important to look over our resources, look over anyone's resources prior to actually having to use them in conversations, right? Because you won't know which way to go, and you wouldn't necessarily even know how many options we offer unless you've been on the phone app and you've already downloaded it and you've already started looking at these things and you get a sense for, yeah, I see what I can use and what really fits my personality and what might even be appropriate in any given situation. So for the 3 segments of today's show, we're going to talk about each possible response to this objection, that it seems rather intolerant, that you would think that your religion, your view about God is exclusively true at the exclusion of all other views about God, given that there are so many views out there, and we're in a culture in which we almost have this smorgasbord of ideas about God. So let's just give you the first way you might respond to somebody who makes this kind of claim. I'll put the answer or this response up on the screen so you can track along. Here we go. Okay, so if someone said to you, it's narrow-minded to think that Jesus is the only way to God, you might respond like this. Well, Christians don't claim that Jesus is the only way to God. Jesus claimed he was the only way to God. Now, granted, as a Christian, I'm going to agree with Jesus because I'm a Christ follower. But it was Jesus who said, I am the way and the truth and the life. And get this is not all he said. He said this. He said, no one comes to the Father except through me. That's in Scripture. That's in our New Testament, Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6. Now, that is clearly a very bold claim. And I get that. And I can see why someone listening to that would think that's a bold claim. And I agree. But what if the claim is true? Look, let me give you an analogy. Doctors claim isoniazid is the only true cure for tuberculosis. If you don't put isoniazid in that cocktail of antibiotics, you don't get cured from TB. That's a pretty bold claim. You mean to tell me you think that your one response, isoniazid, is the only way to get... Well, yeah, it is. The question is, do you think those doctors are being narrow-minded to claim that isoniazid is the only way to cure TB? What if their claim is simply true? Isn't it more important to investigate the claim, the claim about the cure, than to dismiss it out of hand because you think it's narrow-minded? You wouldn't do that with the drug for TB, isoniazid. Why would you do that on this kind of claim? Look, what we're trying to do in this kind of response, this first level response to the objection, is we are trying to relate this. It's not a claim about an opinion, a subjective opinion, like your opinion about your favorite kind of vacation or your favorite kind of car. There are subjective truth claims out there. I get that. But this is the claim about isoniazid anyway, is a claim about a cure. Either isoniazid, the object we call isoniazid, is capable of curing TB or it's not. But your opinion is not going to change whether isoniazid can get it done. Well, what if this claim about God is similarly rooted in an objective reality known as God? Your opinion won't change it. What if it's just true? Wouldn't you want to examine that first? Now, that might initiate a conversation about whether or not it is true. And that might mean you have to take them on a path of evidence that would show them why you trust the reliability of Scripture, why you think that Christianity is a true reflection of reality. I get all that. That's why I say these kinds of responses are really designed to be conversation starters. And it's going to mean that you and I have to be prepared as Christian case makers to make the response necessary to actually support our claims. And you might think, well, that's a lot of work. Well, there's a lot of stuff we do that's a lot of work, and we're willing to take it on. Why would we not be willing to take on this challenge? The challenge to know what it is we believe. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'll give you another way that you can respond to this objection that it's intolerant to think that Jesus is the only way to God. Okay, now you may have noticed that in order to respond to this particular objection, we kind of have to dip our toes into the distinctions between subjective truth claims and objective truth claims. And we did a quick shot on the nature of truth, whether truth, objective truth, exists at all. And you can find that on the app. It's a prior episode of our Cold Case Christianity television show. So you can find those resources available. By the way, if you haven't taken the time, and maybe you're behind, maybe you discovered us for the first time this week and you're watching our show for the first time. Okay, I get it. Well, we've done a bunch of these. This is our 5th season. We're well over 112, 110 episodes so far. So you can go back and see all of those episodes on our YouTube page. And you can find that simply by going to our home website, which is at coldcasechristianity.com. And you'll see on the top the links to all of our social media platforms, including YouTube. And if you go into the YouTube page, you'll see that there is actually a playlist for all of our Cold Case Christianity television shows. So you can go back and catch up on all these. But I'm only offering that because it's going to be important really to master this objection, which really in some ways is related to the nature of truth. And that's what we're doing here. We're talking about the truth claim of the Gospels, the claim about Jesus, that Jesus said it himself. And I think a lot of that is going to require us to understand why Christianity is, that the record we have about the teaching of Jesus in Christianity is reliable. And I've written about that on a book called Cold Case Christianity. That book really talks about why we can trust what the gospel authors had to say about Jesus in the first place. So it is going to require us to at least be able to defend what we believe about the book. We are people of the book, are we not? And I get it that a lot of us we trust as a matter of just sincere faith, that we trust that what God's Word tells us is true. But if you're going to try to talk about this with someone like me when I was 34 and was a very committed atheist, you're going to have to move beyond. You have to give me a better reason than that for why you trusted the Bible. I mean, people who would quote the Bible to defend the Bible really didn't make much ground with me. I had to actually work through the evidence for the biblical reliability, and I've tracked that in that book, Cold Case Christianity. Now let's get to the second kind of response you might give to this objection. Really, that it's intolerant or it's narrow-minded to think that Jesus is the only way to God. So I'll put it up on the screen for you so you can see it. Okay, so again, we're trying to respond to this objection. It's narrow-minded to think that Jesus is the only way to God. Okay, but what's the alternative really? That every world religion leads to God equally, that they have the same power to bring us to God, that they are somehow the same, they have the same meritorious, the same merit, the same value in bringing us to God? How could that be? You know, given the fact that the world religions, they don't agree with each other, they contradict one another. Some forms, for example, of Buddhism and Confucianism, they actually deny the existence of a divine personal being that we would call God. And this, all the monotheistic religions, all those things we know historically, like Judaism and Christianity and even Islam, yeah, they agree that there's a one God, but they certainly disagree about the nature of that God, right? I mean, they contradict one another on the nature of the God that's described on their pages. Hindus actually believe in many diverse gods, a number of gods. Look, every religious system claims that the other view that's held by the competing systems is incorrect. So it's not just that they don't agree, they also point fingers at the other systems and say they're wrong. Now, given all the contradictions that exist, right, between those systems, these different religious systems in the world religions, it's clear to me that they're either all wrong or one of them could be right. But just one, because they don't agree with each other, so they can't all be right. They could all be wrong. Or one could be right and the rest could be wrong, but they can't all be right. You might call that reality, that truth, that reality about the nature of truth and the nature of these claims made by these religions, you might call that narrow-minded, but it's just the inevitable consequence. It's where you end up when you have a set of contradictory claims. Look, given that, wouldn't it be wiser just to investigate the religions to see if one of them is true, rather than to complain about the obvious contradictions? Now, I'm offering this as a potential response because I think that a lot of people are under the misunderstanding that religions basically teach the same things. Now, it is true that there are common concepts that exist between all. You'll find some version of a golden rule or of the value of love or service, or you'll find some commonalities between the world religions. But you'll see that they actually have many things they disagree about that are not just secondary issues. They are primary essentials, doctrinal essentials of each faith system. This is the very nature of God. For example, we are Trinitarians as Christians. We believe in the triune nature of God. That is not true for other monotheistic world religions. We believe in the deity of Christ. Other religions may believe that Jesus was a guy. He was even a wise rabbi, maybe even a prophet. The Baha'is believe that he was a prophet who emanated another appearance, a manifestation of God. But they don't believe that he's Jesus the way that we consider him to be, God incarnate. So again, there are some essentials, and I think people just don't realize how different each world religion is. It's going to be our duty when responding to this kind of an objection to help them see, well, look, I'm with you. I mean, even if I wasn't going to claim today that Christianity is true, one thing I could say with certainty is that all of these beliefs, all of these claims about God can't be true because they are far too different to all stand and be considered equally true. All they can be considered is equally false. So that's something I think it's powerful for us to, and if nothing else, we're doing people a service because it's that truth that would cause somebody to actually investigate the claims themselves. And if that's all we do in a conversation, remember, these conversations aren't always about getting people right to the edge of the gospel, being able to present the gospel. Sometimes your conversations are simply about knocking down barriers and going as far as you can. You may not get to present the gospel to somebody today. You may just be able to knock down a barrier. And maybe that opportunity to present the gospel is going to come later on within your conversation with that person, or maybe it's never going to come. Maybe that opportunity to share the gospel is something that you have set up well for somebody else to do a month from now, 2 months from now. It's a collection of conversations that often lead people to truth. So what we're trying to do here is just make sure that we provide them a reason to investigate these claims. I know that when I was not a believer and I was in high school, I had a sociology teacher who was Baha'i. And he gave me scripture from Baha'u'llah, and I read it. I was fascinated by ancient wisdom. I didn't have to believe anything about Baha'u'llah in particular in order to glean the wisdom from his teaching. I was always interested in those kinds of wisdom teachings, right? But it's because he interested me. He made claims that this was somehow different and special and was the real view of God. And so that's what we're doing here. We're just trying to say, hey, look, even if I don't make a case today for why I think Christianity is the real view, at least recognize that they can't all be true. And it's worth your time to investigate the differences. And for a lot of people, this might be the first time they really come to know that there are differences. And what we're going to do in this last response is we're going to take a look at the self-refuting nature. And we've talked about this also in prior broadcasts, that there are some claims that are simply self-refuting. In other words, the statement itself contradicts the claim, and it's self-evident. So for example, if I said I can't speak a word of English, I've clearly contradicted myself because I had to speak several words of English to make the claim I can't speak a word of English. So you know right away that there's something wrong with the statement, if for no other reason than the fact that I violated it from the get-go. Well, that's actually true about this statement that it's narrow-minded to believe that Jesus is the only way to God. That's actually in itself a self-refuting statement. And I want to be able to at least offer that. Now, I wouldn't start here necessarily because I don't want to play this game, well, you're not thinking well or you're not thinking critically to start with. But at some point in responding to this objection, I would be willing to talk about the self-refuting nature of any claim that in essence says it's narrow-minded to think a certain way. So let's use that as a basis for our third response to this objection. I'll put it on the screen for you. Okay, responding to this idea that it's narrow-minded to think Jesus is the only way to God, I might say this. Okay, it sounds like you're saying, now correct me if I'm wrong, that it's narrow-minded for me to think my belief is true. And that anyone who disagrees with me, other people who hold a different belief, who disagree with me, are incorrect. Now, it sounds to me like you're saying that that's narrow-minded, but isn't that what you're doing too? I mean, can we even help but do that? You think your belief that there are many ways to God is true and that I'm wrong. Isn't that equally narrow-minded? I mean, not in terms of how many ways you might get to God, but this narrow-minded idea itself, the claim itself, that, to think that there must be more than one way to God. That is equally narrow-minded, isn't it? I mean, everyone thinks their belief is true, or they wouldn't believe it, okay? But let's face it, there are times when two beliefs are contradictory, like yours and mine right now are contradictory. Wouldn't it be wiser just to investigate the beliefs rather than to argue that no one should hold them as though they are true? I could say the same thing to you. I think at this point it's just better for us to investigate the claims. Have you even fully investigated Jesus enough to know if he truly is the only way to God? Now what we're trying to do here is to help people to see that any claim about truth, especially when it contradicts other claims about truth, is exclusive. That's okay. Really, that doesn't offend me that there are claims about truth that are exclusive. All that does is open the door for me to figure out which exclusive claims are actually true. So I don't want to kind of call, I got you there, you got a self-refuting statement. That's not my goal here. My goal here is simply to remind people that every truth claim, especially when it contradicts other truth claims, is an exclusive claim about reality that I could say that's kind of narrow-minded, that you're not willing to consider my claim as well as yours. Because you're saying to me, I'm not willing to consider your claim as well as mine, and that's narrow-minded. So there's two ways to look at the narrow aspect of this claim about Jesus. One is the idea that only one way gets you to God. I get it. That's pretty narrow. But Jesus told us that was a narrow gate through which we would pass. The other way is to offer any claim, and every claim by its nature is exclusive and narrow-minded if you think of it that way. So I just want to be able to work on both levels when I'm talking to people about their objection related to Jesus being the only way. Again, we want to start by helping them to see that I am not inventing a claim 2,000 years after the fact. This is a claim that is itself 2,000 years old because it came from the lips of the Master. Jesus made this claim. And then all we are left to do is simply to test it. And by the way, I teach young people at Summit Worldview Conference this principle all the time. Once you discover that a claim is objective rather than subjective, the only thing left to do is to determine whether it's true or false. So you take two steps. Is that claim objective or subjective? I like vacations in Tahiti. I think those are the best vacations you can possibly. Tahiti vacations are the best. Okay, that claim, Tahiti vacations are the best, is a subjective claim. It's based on the subject who holds that opinion. It's not based on the nature of Tahiti. It's who responds to Tahiti. Isoniazid is the cure for TB. Well, that's grounded in the object known as isoniazid. Once you determine it's an objective claim, all that's left to do is to determine, is isoniazid the true cure for TB? Is that really what works? Once you determine that a claim is grounded in the object rather than in your opinion, and this is what Christianity is. Christianity is a claim that is grounded in, like the claim that God exists, the claim that Jesus is God. These are not a matter of opinion, and so that means all that's left for us to do is to determine if the claim is true or false. And that's what we're trying to do by looking at evidence. So I hope that as we look at these three potential responses to this objection that it's narrow-minded to believe that Jesus is the only way to God, opens your mind to thinking about, number one, the nature of truth. Number two, the nature of the evidence for this claim. Number three, the way that we even assess religions and the fact they don't all agree. They cannot all be true. And finally, the nature of self-refuting statements. I think if you take that approach, you'll be able to respond to this objection as well as anybody on the planet. So I hope that helps you, and I will see you back here for another quick shot at Cold Case Christianity.